Hi there, welcome to Political Scope. I'm Nia Suban. In this edition, we will be reviewing the defense sector, and to do this review is no other person than the head of the Presidential Secretariat and the Secretary to the Cabinet, Dr. Roger Luncheon. Dr. Luncheon, let me welcome you once again to NCN.
Good night, Nias.
When we talk about the defense sector, what is being defended, if I can start off with that?
Well, I think that's a good way to start because, quite understandably, quite a few people are of the mistaken impression that here we speak of the military. And whilst the military is indeed a significant component of this whole response mechanism, the defense response mechanism, it is not the sole component. And indeed, people speak about hard and soft power. And in our context, I think we cannot exclude the important role that one, the other agencies of the executive, particularly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and going fundamentally to the Constitution, the obligations that the citizenry bear in defense of the homeland. So indeed, when we speak about the defense sector, we're really speaking about a comprehensive approach. We're looking at not only the military, we're looking at those other, if I might call them, appendages that contribute to the defense of the nation.
May I ask her to maybe expand a bit on that and in terms of what would comprise the defense sector?
Well, for us here, specifically, we're looking at the military, the Guyana Defense Force, and those allied joint service entities that are involved in supporting the military. We're looking here at the foreign service that are involved in supporting the nation in its defense of the territorial integrity and national sovereignty. And of course, we're looking at the citizenry in general, the way in which they are mobilized or mobilizable to respond to threats and challenges to the nation.
Let's talk about this because the program is premised on a review of 2014. Let's start with challenges. What would have been some of the challenges that this sector would have faced in 2014?
Well, let's start with the normal challenges that a defense sector would face, and those are generally in the form of external factors, you know, neighbors or external states would engage in acts of aggression. Then you have internal factors, and the world today is witnessing quite a bit of internal factors that can climax to challenges for state power, coups, various degrees of insurrection. And then our most fundamental, this is the resourcing, the state being able to provide resources to address the entirety of its defense needs at any one particular point in time. These are the three main challenges that are generally born or generally confront the defense establishment in any jurisdiction. Guyana is no different. Let's take Guyana and external aggression. We don't have a hegemonic philosophy. That's the state philosophy. It's not predicated on hegemony. We are not party to armed aggression pacts with any other nation to subjugate other nations. This is a peace-loving country with embrace of the United Nations Charter. And as such, we feel that acts external aggression would have to be unilateral and premeditated. It cannot be in response to anything that Guyana or its agents would have or could have indeed perpetrated. We have over the years seen wavering up and down tension at our borders, and indeed unquestionable economic aggression, particularly in the West, as resolution of our issue with Venezuela has eluded us to this day. In the earlier period, and I say this guardedly, in the earlier period, economic aggression was par for the course. And indeed, quite a number of economic engagements. I use the example, the Beale deal that sought to establish in the Northwest District the U.S. firm and their satellite communication business, launching satellites, and it suffered as a consequence of the economic aggression of our neighbor. Over the years, I think those acts have played out, waxing and waning. But those are the examples of challenges that we faced then. And the more recent example in the what we insist are the territorial sea of Guyana, the challenges that we had to endure when the licensed survey vessel was actually seized by the military, by the Navy. So external aggression in 2014. Internal,
Before you come to internal, sir, I think I was talking to you earlier. There's a perception, and I heard about this. It was raised with me last week that Guyanese, if government want to establish any major business on the Essequibo, they probably will need some kind of permission. Is this true?
I said in the earlier years, and this was immediately after the objection that the then Venezuelan government raised formally about the outcome of the arbitral award, they did exert significant influence on investors in the area that they claim that would have been theirs, were their claim to reject the arbitral award sustained. Over time, this economic aggression has waxed and waned. Certainly, it is not as applicable as it was then, save and except this peak that occurred in 2014, as I mentioned, the seizure of the Anadarko vessel, survey vessel, that was in Guyanans waters.
We are still in
So
China.
there is, in terms of the necessity of obtaining some no objection, so to speak, from Venezuela, Venezuelan authorities for engaging in economic activities for Guyanese or investor certified or authorized by Guyanese to engage in economic activity in these areas, none exists.
As we still on challenges externally, is there any challenge that the government may have encountered during the course of the year, let's say with our southern neighbor and our eastern neighbor?
Challenges of the sort that have occurred on the West have isolatedly been in the West.
Okay. All right. And let's
Now,
come to
the internal factors, we mentioned that generically we're speaking here about the extremes, coups, and insurrection. And of course, the stability of the state has been preserved for the entire 2014.
How big of a concern is this to the government?
Over the last decade, I would say it has become less and less of a concern. Certainly, you would recall the period of the Feynman Yang, where there was obviously a concerted effort by some to undermine the authority of the state. Yes, there was instability, but that has been restored, and indeed, since then, there hasn't been a challenge of any significant magnitude to the stability of the state. So at the level of internal factors, none. Resourcing is a kettle of a different fish, or a fish of a different kettle, whichever one it is. I think you could quite understand that given the military and the defense establishment and their assessment of the threat analysis, the demands can be quite significant, enormous, insofar as financial, budgetary allocations. So there is always tension with what is actually available and what is provided and what is needed. By far and large, the budget for the defense establishment has been growing, but I must admit the threats have been growing, and the demands, if one were to call it that, have also been growing. And it takes a particular kind of arrangement to satisfy the defense establishment with resources, both human and other than human, financial resources, technology, to indeed discharge their fundamental responsibility of territorial integrity and to defending the national sovereignty. We have been able to strike a mean, a balance between what is needed and what is provided.
How big an impact, if any at all, would resourcing be on the technological advancement of the defense sector?
The demand for technology exists primarily in the special units, Coast Guard, the Air Corps in particular. And here you're talking in keeping abreast with what is done by the neighbors. People call this the Joneses phenomenon. If your neighbor has this military capabilities, you should get something similar or something that can counter. And trying to keep abreast can indeed be an enormous challenge. If they get helicopters, you got to get helicopters, or you have to deal with a thrust to get rotor wings. If they get speedboats and they have out seagoing EZ capable vessels, we have to also reciprocate and get something similar. Those logics have indeed not fallen on deaf ears. And over the last decade, definitely within the last term of the Jagdo administration, 2006 to 2011, the wave of capitalization, this is not debt capitalization, not debt, because we didn't borrow to capitalize. We bought helicopters, ships to move the technological capabilities of the military to levels that were appropriate for our level of economic development and the demands, the needs, and the results of threat analysis.
Based on what you said about neighbors, the Joneses effect, if I heard you right, clearly there would be
Keeping
some,
up with the Jones, actually.
clearly there will be some kind of a pressure. But how much has that pressure been an influential factor on what government will spend on the defense sector?
I would say this, we would not have the military going to extraordinary efforts to obtain what is available. So the usual resort that in some places of this quid pro quo and this keeping up with the Jones is not replicated here. In Guyana and in our planning or budgetary planning, the resources that are available for investing in capitalization of the defense establishment, that is provided without any question, without any qualms. This is what is available, this is what is provided.
Well, let's talk a bit more about, more specifically now about the military. How would you describe the role of the military here in Guyana?
Defense of our territory, maintaining the integrity, I think, is hallowed. And its physical presence in all of the sectors is, for all intents and purposes, fundamental. Whether it's the east, the west, whether it's the north, out in the east, the presence of the military and the investments in the Coast Guard, the investments in the Air Corps, and the ability to engage in surveillance, the ability to be physically present in these areas, indeed addresses one of the more fundamental roles of the military. But that is not all. Definitely, a military oftentimes is subjected to the need by the civil authorities to support, to respond to, in the case of what I spoke of, victims of internal instability and internal aggression. And our whole concept of the joint services has seen over the years of its adoption, over the years of its implementation, the military becoming a firm component of the whole apparatus that addresses the stability of the state, the support for the law enforcement, the civilian authorities as they pursue law and order in Guyana.
But some may want to say that more could be done given given what has been happening, there could be more support for local law enforcement here. How would you respond to that? And given the perception by some that maybe the military should be more visible than less visible, and that could give rise as to exactly what do they do on a daily basis?
Well, put it this way, it rises to the occasion. It rises to the occasion. There is absolutely no question about their involvement in supporting civilian authorities. Let's go back to the Feynman days. I don't think that anyone familiar with the state response to that period could indeed dismiss or adopt a dismissive approach about the highly involved contributions and participations of the military. The military was on full alert. They were out there in Buxton, they were out there in Agricola, they were out on the roads in the thoroughfares. Indeed, if my recollection is correct, the terminal events that led to the eradication of that threat to the stability was indeed engendered by military in support of the civilian powers. So, in the absence of a threat of that magnitude, we might euphemistically say the military deserves to be in the barracks, and the role is not as evident as it would have been when confronting such challenges. And indeed, it is not only the need to go out there in support of the civilian authorities, it is also to conduct the affairs of the military in ways that regain and retain the confidence of the Guyanese people. And as a result, rather judicious use of the military. The military is not a civilian law enforcement entity. The military use of force is quite different from the way in which civilian law enforcement agencies use force. And there has to be some clear-cut understanding of those instances when the military is called out in support of civilian law enforcement agencies and has to act appropriately.
In terms of the support to the civilian authority, the police, what will be the deciding factor to say, well, look, we need you guys now to get involved?
Exclusively the decision of the police authorities. Exclusively. The police authorities, on their assessment of the overall situation, will determine we need help, and the request would be made. And I can safely say, over the years, I've been the Secretary to the Defense Board. Over those years, those requests have always been honored.
Still on the role of the military, sir, you mentioned about their role in the Coast Guard and all the other things that they do. But with a manpower about 5,000, how big a challenge does that pose to what they're expected to do? Is that adequate? Is that below par? Is that acceptable?
The most recent strategic review sees incremental increases. Right now, strange as it may sound, our access and our use of resources, Coast Guard and Air Corps, is somewhat compromised by the availability of human resources. Our Essequibo is serviceable. The metal sharks that we have bought, the floating bases that have been established, they're not operating at 100% of what they can ideally do because of shortages, skill shortages. And indeed, one of the 2015, or you might say, imperatives would be to very quickly close that gap and to be able to exploit fully the resources that have been provided by the state to these entities, to these specialized bodies, so they can properly contribute to the state defense establishment and to safeguarding the welfare of the Guyanese.
How big a factor is the vastness of Guyana and the topography in the military executing their duties?
We start out making a concession when we admit that this would be a small, well-trained military. It is rooted in a historical understanding. 93,000 square miles is not going to be policed by a military of the strength that we have. And therefore, the approach has been outposts, communication, transportation, good, reasonable lines of supply, the development of the reserves, and our ability to mobilize. And of course, the soft power, the use of soft power.
Has the role of the military changed since the PPP-CIFIC came into office in 1992?
Well, much more than the role. I recall one of my earlier encounters with the then president, Dr. Jagan, who understood the need to heal the breach between large segments of the Guyanese people and the military. I don't believe those of us who are conversant with the history of the politics, history of government, can forget the role that was ascribed to the military as an agent of the then PNC party in subjugating the democracy of this country, in denying free and fair elections. But we know a patriotic military had to rise above that historical fact. And Dr. Jagan said one of our contributions, this is in 1992, was to contribute to that healing. I want to believe I've worked with every single chief of staff since 1992. Every single chief of staff since 1992. And I have literally kept Dr. Chedi Jagan's exhortations foremost in our engagement with the administration, engagement with the military establishment.
In reflecting on the 22 years since, how would you now assess that change?
We have, I would believe, vastly restored the confidence of the Guyanese people in its military. I think the professionalism that we have insisted that the military has exhibited over these years, their record over these 23 years, 22 years, has been such that we have been able to all intents and purposes, remove from the immediacy of the engagement with the Guyanese people those historical, those unpleasant historical antecedents. And as such, I would want to believe, I'm not going to stand upon the warship and say mission accomplished, but I would want to believe that successive generations of Secretary to the Defense Board, successive generations of Chief of Staff would see this period as one that has built and has been building on the restoration of military traditions, the positive military traditions.
Was it difficult, or was it something that came naturally over the years?
There was a difficulty. It's not easy to eliminate, to remove from one's consciousness some of the issues, what took place, but time is a great healer. Time is a great healer. And when what is being done currently supports the efforts to heal, supports the efforts to undo, I think the opportunities that are realized can be quite significant, as has happened in the Guyanese military example.
We have, again, in our body politic, we have the leader of the opposition being a former brigadier within the military. How has politics been affected, if at all it has been, by what we can term the Granger factor?
I've spoken on this before, and I am still of the same opinion. I think the militarization in the PNC has been a quick fix, and of course their successes in 2011 elections attest to this fact. One may quibble whether indeed there is a one-on-one relationship between Granger, the militarization, and the successes. But I wouldn't quibble. I would give David the edge and say yes. But I have said that what it has done is generate enormous potential for unraveling what has happened over the last 23 years. The potential, of course, of within the body politic, of divisiveness. It is easy to cultivate, revive memories. It is easy to cultivate and revive memories. And the specter of the military and a military-dominated opposition, and for many horrors, a military-dominated government, I think sets a radical reversal of where and what we were doing. Moreover, and I think this is perhaps something that we have to continuously address, the impact on the serving military. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind. I've seen the Facebook articles, I've seen the social media. It is divisive. It is divisive. The Chief of Staff could walk off of his job respectful of the civilian-military relationship tomorrow, a strong architect of the opposition. Somehow it is not part of our political traditions. I have examined this in CARICOM, and there aren't many examples in our English-speaking CARICOM region. And I have gone further afield, and of course the results have been mixed. You even have those internal instabilities that end with military coups, where the self-same Egypt, Fiji, in these countries, Mali, the military takes over. The specter is disturbing.
It is
The
a major
specter is
concern.
disturbing.
This is a major concern for
For
the government.
Well, I would say for the HPS, for the Secretary of the Defense Board, and perhaps it's 23 years and the threat to the undoing of 23 years of patient effort that by one fell swoop can, not necessarily will, but by one fell swoop can indeed undo all that has been contributed, all that has been put into getting us to where we are today. I despair about the decision that was made, and I don't have an issue in saying that publicly, that were I to be given the authority by whatever possibilities, I probably would have a constitutional amendment that would not allow this situation that sees within a reasonable time frame serving members of the disciplined forces ensconced in political and actively engaged in politics within days, weeks of their resignation, retirement, removal from service.
But some may want to oppose that to say,
Oh, I don't
in
doubt.
a free country, in a free country.
It's not a free country, I'm told. I had this discussion with the last Chief of Staff, Gary Best, who felt that these are the constitutional rights. And I have to admit, it is. But I think our history, what we have gone through, and what other countries went through, ought to have some influence on how avidly we protect these constitutional rights of individuals, particularly when there is a possibility of conflict with the general and the public good.
The professionalism that you spoke about of the military, so highly of the military, and given the potential that you noted a few moments ago, isn't that professionalism in many ways enough to be able to mitigate the kind of potential that you're talking about?
Well, I put it to you this way. It puts a tremendous pressure on the Defense Secretariat. It puts a tremendous pressure on the Defense Headquarters and the leadership, because now the potential exists and they have to ensure that things don't go awry. That's what the current situation could lead to.
And before we move on from this particular area of discussion, you noted the potential of reviving historical fears. Can I ask that maybe you explain exactly what you mean by that?
Well, that's exactly what Comrade Chetty in 1992 experienced, because the People's Progressive Party, Civic, in 1992 became the government. But it was a government of a divided people, particularly when it came to the joint services, when it came to the military. And he recognized, the People's Progressive Party recognized that this was an untenable, this was an unhealthy situation in any evolving democracy. That indeed military with a big question mark was indeed a disaster from the day one. And my specific mandate was to do all that was necessary to heal the breach. I'm pretty certain the same instructions were given to the then Minister of Home Affairs, the former Minister Feroz Mohammed, who dealt with the civilian law enforcement agencies. But we had a collective responsibility to work with the joint services and work with the Guyanese people in restoring their confidence in their joint services. And today I could say unreservedly, I said it, I don't feel I can go on the warship and say mission accomplished. But I can sit down in this studio tonight and say that by far and large, we have accomplished where we are today in 2014 compared to 1992. The joint services, the military in particular, has retained, regained, and I want to believe has even surpassed where it was, even in 1968-69 at its origins.
Dr. Luncheon, we have been speaking about challenges as we review 2014, the sector for defense. Care to talk about some successes that you would have had during this period?
Well, I will tell you one that I'm very pleased about. Again, it's during Comrade Jagdeo's term, 2006 to 2011, when we had the presidential engagement with the then president of the Republic of Suriname. And we have to step back a bit and concede that historically there was a tension in the relationship between Guyana and Suriname, a tension that was underpinned by unresolved issues related to the border, related to our unresolved issues at sea and at land. And what the two presidents undertook was not to ignore the existence of the issue, but what they undertook to do was to put it in its proper place, not to have it circumscribe the evolving relationship between two such similar neighbors, Guyana and Suriname. And we have been successful. The border issues have been put in its respectful place, and we have progressed with relationships between Guyana and Suriname to our mutual satisfaction. And 2014, I think we have seen the kind of benefits in that presidential engagement between then President Jagdeo and the current President Bouterse in forging those ties, notwithstanding the continued unresolved difficulties, particularly with that land issue. And I want to highlight that perhaps as in our engagement as perhaps one of the more promising achievements, and one that I feel we can build on in 2015 to eventually come to the kind of conclusions that would allow cooperation between the two countries to be unfettered by the colonial history associated with the border issue.
You spoke of Suriname, you spoke of Venezuela, both in terms of challenges and successes. What about our neighbor to the south, Brazil? Anything that you want to mention?
I think I haven't said anything about Brazil because Brazil has been a big brother. Brazil has stood on the side of fair play. Brazil has stood steadfast. Brazil, in respecting and hallowing its borders, have simultaneously done so. The tri-junction point that is a border for Brazil is equally a border for Guyana.
All right, as we review 2014, let's look forward then to 2015. Where do you see the sector, how do you see the sector growing in 2015?
We have to confront our issues, particularly resolving the issues with Venezuela. The late President Hugo Chavez repudiated the Venezuelan rejection of the arbitral award. Not one time, many times. He repudiated the Venezuelan rejection of the arbitral award. It had no merit. He exposed the intrigues of the Americans and others as they sought then to give more emphasis on their ideological onslaught against the then Burnham regime. It's a good way to go. We have, with the support of the United Nations and their good offices, been over decades trying to resolve this issue surrounding the Venezuelan rejection of the arbitral award. Unfortunately, the last good officer, Professor Gervan, died tragically after his accident in Dominica, and it in a strange kind of way provided us in 2015 with an opportunity to decide how shall we further the resolution of this issue. Have we exhausted the bilaterals? Is there any additional hope? Can we see potential in maintaining, in furthering the bilateral? If not, what are the options? Multilateral? Binding arbitration? These are decisions that have to be made sooner than later. And I think that the administration in 2015 has to put those at the front burner, because the development, Guyana and Venezuelan relationships, they pivot around the resolution of this issue.
How optimistic are you of a swift resolution to all of this?
I am not optimistic about a swift resolution. As you well know, successive generations of leaders and legislators in Venezuela have taken this issue to the level of constitutional impositions, and I suspect may even have it evolved into an electoral issue to confront those who are pro-resolution and those who are anti-resolution and want to embrace and enforce the status quo.
All right, you spoke about the by talking about Venezuela-Guyana relations, you're basically dealing with external. But in terms of 2015 and beyond, internally, in terms of the defense sector for 2015, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I spoke about in terms of resources. And here we are attracting, we are acquiring, not debt, we are acquiring technological resources and recapitalizing both our two special units, the Coast Guard and the Air Corps. I spoke about how the current dispensation limits the adequacy of our utilization of these resources. We can do more with what we have. And therefore, 2015, I can anticipate that enormous effort will be spent training up to the adequate levels, recruiting and retaining the servicemen and women who would need to utilize the equipment and the technology that are available now in the Air Corps and in the Coast Guard in defending our territorial integrity and responding to the demands of our national sovereignty.
Sir, in closing, how pleased are you with the strides that would have been made in the sector, not only in 2014, but over the years?
Many people would want to believe that there is a personal interest, there is a personal satisfaction. And I don't intend to disabuse their mind. I would hate to be so immodest that I don't acknowledge that I do have some satisfaction over these years in seeing what patience and what cultivation of good and what I might consider fair and consistent relationships has produced. But I would go further and say this satisfaction is deeply rooted in this administration and its attitude to the forces, the military and the joint services, and its desire to bring into existence what Comrade Chetty said in 1992. You're not going to get anywhere with a military that is alienated from the people. You're not going to get anywhere. And your responsibility, our responsibility, is of course to heal the breach. And I feel we have so done.
Finally, maybe in one sentence, or if you had to describe 2014 as it relates to the defense sector, what would you say?
We have done as we have planned. We have done what we have expected to get done.
On that note, I want to thank you very much for taking time out from your busy schedule to be able to be here to review the defense sector.
Thank you, Nias.
And may I, sir, on behalf of all of us here at NCN, take this opportunity to extend to you, your family, and the administration best wishes for the Christmas season.
And the same to the NCN family.
You've been watching Political Scope. My guest was Secretary to the Cabinet and Head of the Presidential Secretariat, also Secretary to the Defense Board, Dr. Roger Luncheon, and we reviewed the defense sector. Nias Subhan saying so long and wishing you all the best for the Christmas season. Bye-bye.
Thank you.